Good morning. It all come to order. Ready to start our safety committee meeting. Mr. Mayor, are there any members of the public who are registered to speak?
No, sir. We have no public speakers this morning.
Okay, then we're ready for, on page 3 of your committee book, approval of minutes. Have you read them? Are there any comments or changes? If none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? The minutes are approved. Mr. Mayor, are there any changes to the work plan?
Yes, there are some changes to the work plan. As I mentioned at the Safety Committee meeting in December, the intent going forward is to try to organize our committee work plan around SMS, Safety Management System principles. So last year we had a variety of very good and detailed discussions. I expect that the year ahead of us will bring the same, but if you've reviewed the work plan, you notice that what I've tried to do in the work plan is weave the topics into the 4 pillars of SMS. So I'm not looking to make major changes to what we actually do here. I'm just looking to make sure that we classify what we do in the major pillars of SMS. I'm happy to discuss that in any more detail if anyone wishes, and if the committee is comfortable adopting, we will certainly fill out the work plan with more detail in the months ahead. But if folks are comfortable moving forward, that would be great.
Anyone wishing to make a comment or change? Then, Mr. Mayor, please take us to the rest of the agenda.
Yes, sir. So item number 4 on the agenda is my report. I just kind of wanted to make a couple opening comments, and one would be, as I just mentioned, we covered a lot of very substantial ground in this committee during 2015, and I think that the year ahead of us in 2016 will be no different. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what I think is in store for us in 2016, and communicate that we'll be bringing back to you more detail on each of these issues. First of all, for anyone who was present at Committee Day, particularly for the Long Island Railroad Committee, I know there was a variety of discussions that revolved around persons being struck by trains, and I want to communicate very clearly to this committee, and you asked us to take on this issue. We definitely are eager to do so, and I also wanted to stress that this is not something new for us. This is something that a number of us have been coordinating on already and are interested in addressing. What we have done is to put out a data call to the agencies for more detailed information on these incidents. The data are already coming in since the last couple of days. We'll do a fairly detailed analysis on it. What we want to do is make sure we're addressing the issue of persons being struck by trains, but we want to be sure that we are guided by the science in what we do, and that we're confident that our mitigation strategies, to the extent that we adopt them, will be effective. So I wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention another issue that a number of us have been coordinating on that revolves around bus operator visibility. You certainly have had a number of discussions that have revolved around the design of buses, the training of bus operators, and the interaction of New York City Transit and MTA Bus with the city and Vision Zero. This is something that's a very active partnership, and I suspect that this committee will hear more about our efforts in that regard during the year ahead. We are coordinating on a number of activities, and we'll be bringing more to you on that. Another topic that I think that we will be talking about in this committee in the year ahead is safety reporting. On Committee Day on Monday, there was a robust discussion on C3RS, the confidential close call reporting systems that are now in use at both of our FRA-regulated railroads, and those programs are up and running. We'll talk with you more about those at future committee meetings, and the Safety Council is also discussing very actively ways that we may be able to layer on and provide even other reporting opportunities for our employees to bring safety concerns to our attention. So we'll have more to say about all of these topics in the year ahead, and we'll be populating the work plan accordingly. So with those comments, I wanted to ask Ann Kirsch to address a safety issue that many of you may be aware of, and that is an issue involving hoverboards, or they're also known more technically as self-propelled balance beams. I just kind of wanted to let you know that this is kind of a late-breaking issue that we've been pretty actively engaged on, and we wanted to bring it forward as a coordinated safety issue throughout the MTA agencies. So, Ann, if you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what we've been up to there.
Good morning. Thank you. As David indicated, there's been much discussion surrounding the safety of hoverboards and their use. So we've reviewed some recent events, some guidance and federal agency guidance, and looked to our peers to see what they've been doing as well on the subject. To name a couple, both Amtrak and Metra in Chicago have banned the use and transport of hoverboards on their property. Just to demonstrate so that people know what we're talking about, these are the hoverboards, and you can see them in use here. So the concern is both personal injury and property damage that has occurred across the country, from falls on the hoverboards, collisions with pedestrians, property damage from collision with various properties, or injury to the user themselves. Of as much concern, really, is the fire risk from overcharging of the units, damage to the units themselves, or faulty batteries. The personal injury and property damage are self-explanatory, really, but recently the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration issued a safety alert following a recent investigation where they intercepted 32 cargo containers that were filled with hoverboards containing lithium batteries that were improperly prepared for shipment. There is a federal regulation requiring strict testing of lithium batteries. What they found out during this investigation was that over 80% of those hoverboards found in the shipment were not properly tested, and they did not have the certification of the battery testing. So as a result, PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, issued a safety alert indicating that under certain conditions, lithium batteries can pose a heat, fire, and explosion risk, as seen here in this photo. The PHMSA and the Consumer Product Safety Commission have partnered to educate and determine a path forward, but the Consumer Product Safety Commission indicates that at this time the presence of just a UL mark that we're accustomed to seeing on anything that's properly tested, the UL mark on the hoverboards or their packaging should not be an indication to consumers of the product's safety. And in fact, any such mark is at best misleading and may even be a sign of counterfeit product. So the MTA, similar to skateboards and roller skates, may not be used on our trains, buses, in our facilities, and our platforms. We've done a research back at our rules and regulations to make sure that we're supported here. And due to the concern over the fire hazard caused by the unsafe batteries, our rules also prohibit bringing any item that poses a hazard to others or is flammable onto our property. So we are looking, and we have partnered now with our media experts to bring an extension of our Courtesy Matters campaign into our safety program, as you've seen in the recent past, and we are now using them to illustrate the ban of the prohibition of hoverboards on our property or transport. So this will now give us the opportunity to educate our employees as well as to what they'll be looking for and work at next steps to prohibit the use and transport of hoverboards on our property. That's it.
Questions or comments?
Is the intent, I understand the issue of use. That's not a question to me. Is the intent to ban the transport of hoverboards even if they're still in the box in which they came? If somebody gets on the subway, goes to wherever you buy them, buys it, puts it in the, doesn't open the box, has it in a bag, gets back on the subway to go home, are they violating our rules?
Yes.
Okay. And okay. And if the answer to the question is yes, who's going to tell them that? Okay. Us telling them that after they get on the subway is not the best aspect of that. Really has to tell them that is the retailer at where they bought it, telling them, oh, by the way, now that you bought this, you can't get on the subway or a bus to get home. Have fun walking or get in a taxi, because well, that's assuming you can use them on the sidewalks in New York City. I leave that to New York City.
Yes.
But that's my concern. I'm not arguing the point. I'm just saying most people are going to assume that usage means you can't ride along the platform or up and down the cars. That I have no problem with. They're not going to assume usage means I can't transport it from the retailer where I bought it to the home where I live.
So this is the part where we start the education process. We are using the media campaign to start that, as well as a press release that will be issued later on. We'll be educating our train crews as well, law enforcement personnel, so that they understand and how to deal with this issue. But the hoverboards themselves, whether in the box or out in use, still pose a fire hazard at this time. As they get this under control and identify the counterfeit or the problem hoverboards, that position may change. We still won't allow the use of them on our property, but the transport may be allowable in the future once the federal agencies have gotten this under control.
Okay. But as I said, my suggestion is not only we do it ourselves, but we work with the retailers to let them know, because that's the first place the person is buying the hoverboard, and they need to know there, or a sign there saying, oh, by the way, if you buy this, don't think about getting back on the subway to get home. Or I assume somebody can come up with a much more catchy phrase than that, but, but that's the point. If you really want to have people not do it, you have to let people know they can't do it.
Right. Good point.
Mr. Brown, and then Mr. Ballin, and then Dr. Metzger.
It seems to me like it's hard enough to run the trains, and you guys have got to deal with at first blush I'm thinking too, this is not entirely fair to roller skates and skateboards because they don't blow up, but you got to push back against this tide of marketing that really it's almost like it's invented by Darwin. I mean, people. You have to now go educate people who are clearly very difficult to educate because they're buying one of these things from the get-go. And really, that's who, I don't know how we got to do counter-marketing against a ridiculous, there's not enough safety problems on the railroad. Now you got to have an exploding toy roller skate wheel, whatever the hell it is. And it's almost too much. You almost need support from the National Guard or something to make sure that those people or whoever's riding around in those things. I mean, imagine if you're stupid enough to ride it, all sorts of other damage you could do. We should be glad they don't have cars, I guess.
Yeah. Can you top that? No, I'm going to wait a few minutes to let it subside. The only question I have is just about fact. I just want to confirm something, because this is something new that I didn't know from my reading and from following it generally. Unopened boxes, once you purchase it, before it's charged overnight, that still is a fire hazard? That is something that I hadn't read or understood, and I'm questioning.
And quite honestly, it's counterintuitive, because you would have an expectation that if it's available for sale, it must be safe, and unfortunately, it's been fairly recognized in transportation that defective or counterfeit lithium-ion batteries is a problem that the federal government is really trying to get a handle on. Unfortunately, the intercepted shipment that Ann mentioned a few minutes ago really shows that the issue is not yet under control, and so the urging came from Washington for transportation properties to protect themselves until they can get it under control. Hopefully the issue will go away in the years ahead, but right now it presents itself.
So to be clear.
Dr. Metzger, and then
I have to say I empathize with Norman. There are only so many things we can get accomplished. I do see that your sign makes it clear that you can't carry the board. But I do think that a larger print that says hoverboards or their transport or something like that needs to be said, because the average, I've seen them being carried in boxes just before Christmas. So I think you need bolder print to make the point, and then if at some point they're safe, we'll change it.
Mr. Greenberg?
This issue with lithium-ion batteries, I believe it also delayed the an airplane at one point from being produced. Are there other things out there that have these batteries in them that might cause a similar problem?
The honest answer is yes, but most of those things, like the smartphones that we're all carrying, are much, much smaller, and they have a lot less energy to release.
Thank you.
Only your leg is at risk. Okay.
So the next agenda item is a proposed revision to the charter for this committee.
Has everyone had a chance to see the revisions to the safety charter? Do you want to take us through them very
Sure, I
quickly?
think it's fair to say that they're minor revisions, but they're important revisions because they simply modify the charter to make explicit reference to SMS and safety management systems and sort of charge the committee with the general oversight of SMS at the MTA. This is just part of the safety policy pillar of SMS, and so it's just important that our charter governs the committee in that way. If these revisions are acceptable to the committee, then what the governance process is for a vote of this committee to refer these revisions to the governance committee as a recommendation for it to make.
Mr. Zuckerman?
Thank you, sir. David, you took us through a definition of SMS 3 months ago, I believe, maybe longer. That strikes me as a term of art. That is it's not in common language, it's not common nouns, and it is a proper noun related to a specific body of knowledge that I would suspect that if polled, this line of people I sit next to would not actually be able to get that close to the professional definition. And so I am worried that the striking of a bunch of words that are very clear, annual safety goals, programs, which are completely understandable to the public and to the board, in exchange for a phrase that is an industry term that may be very common for you but not for the public and for us, is suboptimal. I don't mind that we have SMS being in this. I understand it has to deal with a lot of things, but we have two options then. Either A definition is included of SMS, because again, that is not something I think we are aware of, or include SMS with things such as goals and programs and metrics. So you propose whichever path you'd like to go down, but I'd like to discuss that.
I think that's a very good suggestion. My suggestion in response to that would be, why don't we move forward with this charter with the idea of adding a definition of SMS? I feel like it's my job to make sure that all of you become increasingly conversant in SMS and SMS principles, and in fact, that's largely what we're going to do in Agenda Item 6 today and kind of review some of what we did a few months ago.
So is everybody all right with a motion to refer this to Governance Committee with the understanding that we are going to define SMS and spell out exactly what we mean? Is there a motion? Second? All in favor? It is referred to the Governance Committee.
So our next agenda item is actually the last agenda item. That's the SMS framework and safety metrics. So as I just mentioned, a large portion of what we're going to do here is really kind of review what we have discussed on what SMS is and kind of why we're moving in that direction. I do want to just fess up right at the outset about something you won't see today. As important as safety metrics are, We are working very hard to finalize our selection of safety metrics. We are putting the finishing touches on them. We're not quite there. And if maybe I can take a moment to sound a little bit like Tom, Tom probably knows more about safety than I'll ever forget, and we want to give him an opportunity to review and make certain that he's comfortable with them before we bring them to this committee. So with that in mind, we have added a February Safety Committee meeting to kind of continue this discussion once Tom is back with us. So we'll kind of start the discussion today and wrap it up in February would be my intent. So to kind of review SMS a little bit, remember that I have told you that SMS stands for Safety Management Systems. I actually think I agree with Mr. Zuckerman, it's kind of a term of art that doesn't do itself any favors, so I kind of think of it as simply managing safety as a business process, and probably a better term was simply calling it safety management. Kind of in that sense, it's not something that you just find on a shelf and you have it one day and the day before you didn't. SMS is really just the way you govern yourself with respect to safety. SMS is really just something you do. That said, it is important to have definitions. So the formal definition of SMS is on the screen there. It's the top-down, organization-wide, data-driven approach to managing safety risk and assuring the effectiveness of safety mitigations. So it's important that it flows from the highest levels of an organization on down. That's why it's critical to ensure that the chairman and CEO fully understands it, is on board with it, and that's why it's also critical that the safety committee, the board, the agency presidents, and the safety leads are kind of all on the same page with respect to SMS and what it is. And so that's why I suggested earlier in the day that we reformulate the work plan around SMS principles, and why most of what we're going to do in this committee during the year will be organized around SMS principles. The idea is that it provides the strategy to identify and push out best safety practices among our agencies. As I'd mentioned before, SMS will eventually be required for us by regulation, but our desire is to get out in front of that requirement and build it out here in advance, so that the MTA can really become a leader on this in our industry. Much as the Federal Department of Transportation is going to move us toward SMS, it's also something that the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, has been advocating for a number of years. And I know there are a lot of words on this slide, but I did kind of want to take you through a little bit about what the NTSB has written in a number of reports. And this text could have, and I apologize, I hate it when speakers do this, but I'm going to read a good bit of it to you in just a moment. But this text could have come from any number of NTSB reports that have been written over the years, but it did happen to come from the November 2014 report that the NTSB wrote about the incidents that occurred at Metro North Railroad. So it's very much directed at us. So it mentions that the NTSB has long advocated for the use of SMS in all modes of transportation, and that there have been a number of NTSB accident investigations that have identified incidents that could have been prevented through SMS, and this is because SMS is essentially a system to continually monitor pertinent data that's collected so that issues that are emerging can be addressed before they result in an accident. And this quote ends in noting that SMS supports continuous improvement in safety performance through a positive safety culture. That's actually a really important component of SMS that's founded on 4 key priorities or pillars as we've called them, and that's safety policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. So that shows you that this is something that the NTSB has very specifically been calling for. The federal regulatory agencies that oversee transportation are beginning to answer this call. I think it's going to take them a while to get there and implement a rule, but it's an opportunity for us to build out programs that work for us. So I mentioned the 4 pillars of SMS, so just a brief review of those 4 pillars. One pillar is safety policy. A lot of what we do in here I view as setting safety policy for the MTA, even though amending our committee charter may seem a little bit bureaucratic. I think it's important in setting the tone for SMS. The middle 2 pillars of safety risk management and safety assurance are truly the core of SMS as it has traditionally been realized in transportation as system safety program planning. And finally, that pillar of safety promotion is also of importance, and it is where we reach out to employees, customers, and anyone else who's concerned and communicate that we're interested in their safety, or communicate particularly to employees what the procedures and rules are that apply to them. So maybe I'll back up just a moment and call out, in the first couple words in safety assurance are data-driven, and that's really the whole essence of SMS, is that continuous improvement is driven by monitoring data that come from our performance and our systems. So that's kind of where I want to turn for just a moment and talk a little bit about the process that we have set in motion. You're aware that we partnered with the National Safety Council. The MTA has a corporate membership in the National Safety Council. We use that membership to bring the NSC in and lead us through a workshop on SMS principles as they should be informed by safety metrics. That has really put us on a path toward establishing different metrics for benchmarking safety at the MTA. The workshop was particularly important because safety, particularly as envisioned by SMS, is not something that occurs just in the safety department. It's something that is championed from the top down. That's why we invited and had complete participation from the agency presidents at the workshop. And as I said, it's not something that just exists in the safety department. We also invited representatives from various operating and transportation departments to come in and participate as well. And I think that in no small measure led to the success of the workshop. This gave us, well, maybe I'll even talk about something else that kind of informs our selection of metrics, and that's the next slide, which is a couple of more quotes from that same NTSB report. And this may help communicate why this is so important to me and why I want to make it important to all of us. During the NTSB investigation at Metro North, a number of employees were asked about the purview of the Metro North Safety Department, and this report notes that the functions that were attributed to the Safety Department were focused on personal injuries and occupational safety, occupational health issues. And the NTSB notes that worker protection efforts were effective because the number of injuries reported annually at Metro North had decreased for many years, and the number of incidents reported in 2012 was half that reported in 2000, which is great news. That's phenomenal. However, the caution that the NTSB offers is in the next paragraph. While injury prevention is an important function of safety management, studies of significant accidents in other industries, and those other industries are such as nuclear power and chemical process and offshore oil exploration, have shown that improving an improving injury record can sometimes mask unrecognized, unaddressed operational hazards. And they quote Professor Hopkins that reliance on lost time injury data in major hazard industries is itself a major hazard. Now, I don't know that I like that term major hazard, but the idea is high consequence. And in our line of work, as well as those other industries that I mentioned a moment ago, there is the potential for high consequence of events, and it's really important to ensure that we all have our eye on the ball in terms of prevention activities. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that as we move forward, not only are we focusing on customer employee safety, but we're focusing on measures of accident prevention to make sure that we are focusing on the high consequence events that could occur. So we want to make a distinction between measures that pertain to customer and employee safety and those measures that pertain to prevention activities and prevention strategies from the high consequence events that we know can occur. And that's really the crux of this distinction between lagging indicators and leading indicators. And that's where a lot of our conversations have revolved as we have worked to explore appropriate and improved safety metrics for measuring operational safety at the MTA. So the terminology may be very clear to you, but just to make sure, traditionally safety has been measured using lagging indicators, measures of safety performance of how an organization performed last month compared to the month before, or last year compared to the year before. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. However, it really is kind of a rear view mirror snapshot look at safety. SMS tries to take a bit of a more proactive approach to safety, and that's why we want to shift our focus, not necessarily from one to the other, but ensure that our focus is on those leading indicators of safety, so that we are looking at our efforts to prevent accidents and measures of near misses where they're available, to make sure that we're focused on the appropriate stuff. So, from that NTSB report that I mentioned and from our safety metrics workshop, we asked each of the agencies to really consider the specific operational hazards that exist within the agencies and work toward formulating a set of leading indicators that really do pertain to the prevention strategies that are in place. And we believe that doing that is going to enable the agencies and this committee to be focused on metrics that will be able to have the most impact on safety going forward. So, I'm sorry.
Mr. Zuckerman.
Thank you, sir. When we were in our previous home, we had a discussion that's relatively similar, where we discussed inputs versus outputs. A lot of the indicators had been, and the ones we have currently are output ones, meaning X number of people that got hurt, as opposed to inputs, X number of miles we checked, etc. And it would be really helpful, especially since we have maybe another month before we're going to actually talk about what the metrics are. It'd be really helpful as you design the dashboard that you share with the board, which ones are lagging, which ones are leading, which ones are inputs, which are outputs. Particularly, I'd ask this because I think a lot of us have this challenge, making sure that, at least selfishly from the Metro North and Long Island Railroad perspectives, that we try to create a commonality of how we represent things, because I think a lot of us look between the two books and things are similar but different, and that makes comparisons, it's not gotcha, it's just looking for indications across the systems helpful. So given that you have another 4 weeks before that conversation, I'd really appreciate if you think through not just what the metrics are, but how they're shown and how they're comparable. That would just be incredibly helpful as we have this mild restart the way we track safety measures.
I think that's very good advice, and quite honestly, it echoes some of the feedback that we've received from Tom, and we've been doing that. But it provides a good backdrop to talk a little bit about the kinds of metrics that you're likely to see from us. I think you have every right to expect that the numbers we put in front of you must be important, because why would we put them in front of you if they weren't important, right? So what we put in front of you, we're going to be looking for you to focus on. And so that means you're going to kind of see some of a mix of the traditional metrics plus some focus on some of the leading indicators that we want to focus on. That issue of standardization among the agencies is important to us. We want our metrics to look similar and be similar where it makes sense. And I think it makes probably more sense when we're talking about some of the more traditional lagging indicator metrics than it does make sense for the leading indicators. And one of the reasons is, particularly with leading indicators, we want to choose issues of focus where safety performance can really be driven, and once we have arrived at where we want to be, it may be appropriate to, and consequently there may be less commonality between the agencies with respect to the leading indicators, simply because each of the agencies face different challenges, they operate in different environments, and some of our metrics may, for instance, be measures of % complete toward a project. And once the project's complete, then maybe we want to transition into a different metric. I think it's also important to recognize, too, that our lagging indicators are very likely to provide you a bit of a snapshot about performance as it existed during whatever period is covered. The leading indicators aren't necessarily going to try to provide you an overall snapshot of performance of the range of safety programs at a given agency, because we just couldn't fit all that into a book, quite frankly. In contrast, what those metrics are going to try to communicate to you is what is most important on our safety agenda right now, and we want to make sure that we're making progress toward it. So kind of in some of the the way this will look a little bit different for you, just to give you a preview of that, is in particularly those of you who sit on the operating committees, you know that traditionally safety reports in those books have provided you a whole range of metrics, most of which are lagging indicators. We will condense that and pare that down to focus you on certain aspects of those lagging indicators that are important, but I do want to assure you that that doesn't mean that we're going to lose visibility to that stuff. We will review it with you on a periodic basis in more detail, but we just kind of want to shift the conversations that we have toward some of the proactive safety work that we're doing. So I'd love to be sharing with you specific metrics, but I just kind of wanted to give you a flavor of some of the things that you're likely to see to kind of close out my comments, and then would obviously be happy to entertain any discussion items that you may have. So these are some examples of potential leading indicators that we're working on discussing, and also that are common in industries that have adopted proactive safety measures. So, and many of these things are topics that we discussed in safety committee presentations in some detail during 2015. For example, we talked to you about joint labor management safety inspections that are done. So a likely metric could be for many of our agencies is some measure of safety inspections and audits, whether that be the number completed or the number of findings that came from them. But that's certainly something that is a proactive safety activity that can be measured, just like safety stand-downs, toolbox talks, and other kinds of outreach. That certainly is the kind of thing that fulfills that safety promotion pillar of SMS, so that's an appropriate thing to measure. A very common leading indicator that's used to measure safety is measuring the completion of required training, whether that is what % of your forklift operators have been trained on forklift safety, or a different way of going at it might be if you're changing a procedure and you need to train the entire workforce in the new procedure, that's sort of project-based training, and what % complete are you through getting that training rolled out through the workforce. So that's a potential metric. And I mentioned a little while ago that sometimes we undertake specific projects in response either to incidents that have occurred or safety mitigations that we want to put in place, such as the installation of new equipment or the refurbishment of old equipment that has a definite safety connection. And so one metric that we may be wanting to report out on is simply the % complete of that project. And that's a specific example of one that once we get to the end of the project, then we may want to change that metric out for something different. So next month, my intent is that we'll be sitting before you with the opportunity to talk in more specific detail and continue the conversation that we've started this month, but it gave us the opportunity to kind of refresh a little bit on safety management, SMS, and some of the core principles and how that drives the metrics that we're selecting and sort of why we're on this journey.
Any questions? Mr. Brown?
Yeah. First thing I want to know is this kind of a tabula rasa, the MTA is so far ahead of the other agencies, possibly because we're so big, that other people are not doing this already, but aren't there these sort of metrics already laid out by some sort of industry standard? And that's my first question. And I guess the second question, oh, excuse me, I thought you could hear me. You must be building this around certain standard industry metrics, and I'm assuming that sort of that infrastructure, that skeleton that you're building around is controlled by legislation or regulation. What's the regulation, the NTSB regulation specifically, you're building it around? And the second thing would be, isn't this already a developed science on what the metrics are, and don't you want to also be comparable to Metra and Transit or MTA in LA and I guess international standards as well? I don't know if you can hear me or not.
So you're asking, just to make sure everyone can hear, you're asking about is there already controlling legislation or regulation? Are there already off-the-shelf metrics that we should be adopting? Can we look to others within the industry to guide us? And some of the answer really is a lot of the industry is likely to be looking toward us to guide them. This is fairly, I mean, system safety and the management of safety as a process is not new to us, and it's not new to the transit industry or the transportation industry. But specifically, the rollout of SMS is something for surface transportation. It's something the airlines have been doing for a number of years. But for surface transportation, it's fairly new. There ultimately will be regulation that guides us. There's already, from the Department of Transportation, some framework documents that we can follow. But largely what is expected to come from the regulatory process is a framework for transportation authorities and agencies to create their own SMS program. That's what's really critical about SMS, that kind of like I said earlier, it's not really something that you just have that you can pull off a shelf and say, I've implemented the standard guidance and so I'm okay. In fact, the NTSB has seen accidents where industries, particularly the maritime industry, has done that, and it wasn't something they created for themselves. It was something that they sort of bought from a consultant. And it really wasn't something that was fully baked into the operation. And in fact, the FTA has just issued a safety advisory just within the last couple of weeks saying, I'll paraphrase it badly, but saying, please make sure you build a program that works for yourself. Don't just hire a consultant to create something that looks like compliance and then move on to the next thing. It's important to the regulators, and it's important to us, that we create something that really is designed for the MTA and designed for our agencies, that really works well. And I guess I'll also say, it's probably a long-winded answer, but I'll also say, as we all have paid attention to what's happening with respect to the federal agencies, particularly the Federal Transit Administration's outreach to transit properties, frankly, we're the biggest. So a lot of the focus is on very, very small properties and how to scale this down to serve their needs. And so one of the concerns that I've had is that means that nobody's really focusing on something that operates at New York proportions. And so that's another reason why we really want to assume a leadership role on this, to make sure that we create something that works well.
Don't get me wrong that I'm advocating for some sort of cookie-cutter approach to this thing. And we're obviously the biggest and have the most diverse system, too. That's the other thing. You got to juggle so many different balls that, you know, a small bus company has plenty chance of catastrophic events, too. But as far as, like, deleting indicators, that stuff, that's basic shop principle that I learned in my apprenticeship 43 years ago. And that you're going to have a more data-driven analysis of it is, I mean, obviously you got to know how often a toolbox talks are occurring and what the effects are. But this is not new stuff. This is, you know, maybe you need to record the stuff. Maybe somebody's telling you that. But that's really more my question, and I really didn't get it out of you. What was the specific regulatory driver of this? If it is just a consultant's idea, I don't care. It's still, you got to do this stuff. It's basic stuff. I do want you to know all this stuff. I do think you'll have information the other people won't have. However, what is the regulatory framework of it? What's really required of you to do? That's what I'm looking for.
There is no regulatory requirement to do this on the books yet. It'll come. Frankly, we're out in front of it, and I think that's a good position for us to be in.
It is a good place to be. However, when you're out in front, you should know you're out in front rather than, hey, there's a road going this way and there's a road going that way. So to imply that this is all a well-defined thing, I mean, you know, it's also good stuff. We have to get into it, but and I think you're doing a good job of approaching it. This is the way you know, practical people have to approach it. But nonetheless, nobody's making us do it. So, you know, hopefully the other people follow us, but maybe they don't. You know, you still got to make your decisions based on, you know, what's in front of you.
Absolutely, and we're doing this because we genuinely believe it's the right direction for us to take. At the same time, we're not out of step with the regulatory agencies. We're well acquainted with the people who ultimately will write the rules, and they're pleased to see us taking the initiative that we're taking. So we will remain connected with emerging regulations, and those people who have expertise will be writing them to make sure that we're in a good position to help steer this a bit appropriately and guide the industry, frankly.
Well, I mean, we think your NTSB experience is supposed to lead us in the right direction on this stuff, clearly. And if your judgments say there's a regulation coming down the line, there's a regulation coming down the line. On the other hand, it would be nice if we were driving that stuff too, if you really think your analysis is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Pally?
Much of this, at least the indicators on the list, are obviously employee-driven to the employees in whatever facet. And a lot of that has to do with training or retraining or whatever it has to be in that regard. Do we have, or are you working on matrix to determine the effectiveness of that training or retraining beyond the number of people who took the course? I know the number of people who took the course out of how many employees we have in various of the agencies. The question is not the question goes beyond how many people took the course. The question is, was the course effective for the people who took the course? And how do we measure that other than going backwards to determine, okay, you know, we had 10 less accidents last month, which is the beginning of the conversation. Do we look at whether, you know, how those people who took the course interact with their jobs as opposed to the people who have not yet taken the course, who may be in the same area, because obviously not everybody can take it at the same time. We can't have all the conductors take the course at the same time. We'd have to shut down the system. So obviously we do it in a phased-in process. Is there a difference between those people who have and haven't taken it, and is that one of the matrices we're looking at?
So that's a great question, and clearly this is going to be a fun journey to take, because absolutely you're right, that's where we need to be. It may not necessarily be where we start with each of our metrics, but that's sort of why I've kind of cautioned that some of these leading things may change as we get better at this, because there's no question, if you're not measuring training, then you ought to at least begin somewhere and start measuring percent complete. But the much more meaningful place to get to is, do people really come out of the training able to do their jobs safer? Do we actually see a reduction in whatever we were trying to prevent by the training? Do we actually see improved performance? Do we see retention of the material? That's obviously where we'd like to get to. It may not be where we come out of the box, but that's certainly where we're trying to get to.
Is there anyone else? Thank you. I think it's important to mention that, or to acknowledge that position of Chief Safety Officer, the creation of the Safety Committee were in direct response to some very bitter experiences we have had. And we are proactive right now about dealing with them, learning from them, and improving not only our operations, but if in the process we are a national example, so much the better. We done? If there is nothing else, and before we reconvene at 10 a.m. for our board meeting, may I have a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.